Welcome, everyone. Azure CosmosDB Live TV. Welcome back. Episode 49. I've got Matias, Quaranta, and Justine Cocchi, and we're going to talk about our Go SDK. I'm looking at the title of this thing. It's New Improvements to our Go SDK, episode 49, by the way. Really, this is kind of a coming out party, I think. I mean, I know we announced it. I know it's been sitting and working on GitHub for a while, and then we've been working on it. So we'll talk about improvements, but really, this is, welcome everybody, our new Go SDK. We don't get every day to announce or to say we've got a new SDK, but we do. So we've now got .NET, Java, JavaScript, Python, Spark, and now Go. Did I miss any?
No, I think you got it all.
Yeah, I think that's most of it.
You can use REST API, but you don't want to do that.
Yeah.
I think Matias will tell you. I think Justine will say that too. So go ahead, creating that authentication.
Good luck.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Okay. So new Go SDK. This has been a long time coming. I think we first started talking about this maybe 3 years ago. We were batting this around, and I think there was a couple of things at play. I knew we had customers that wanted to use it. In fact, I think we had one, maybe two customers that had actually rolled their own Go SDK, and were using that, and it actually put it on GitHub. We're saying, hey, if you want to use Go, here's something we did, and then had some, the functionality they needed, I guess, primarily, but didn't fully cover the entire surface area for what others needed. So there was that. So we had customers that needed it, and then of course there's this kind of growing community of Go developers, largely driven by Google, of course, and the Kubernetes community and others in that cloud native space. Although I want to say, I saw this on Twitter earlier, Kubernetes is not equal cloud native. Okay, you can do non-Kubernetes and still be cloud native, right? So
true.
I don't want to be controversial here, but it's true.
You can get more comments if you are.
I'm going to get more comments, I'm sure. Yeah, that's okay. Leave your comments in the chat here. Just put questions or comment or whatever bad things you want to say to me in the chat is fine. So, okay, let's get started. And Matias, I think you're going to walk us through, and Justine through some of the big pieces of our Go SDK. And we're going to get to see this in action too, I guess, right?
Yeah. Okay. So the Go SDK is still in beta, so we want to mention that. This is still, our preview beta SDK, and we'll walk you through all of what's supported today, and we know that there are some big things that aren't supported. So we really want to hear from you guys. We want this to be really interactive. A big part of how we prioritize, what we add is actually community feedback. So if you want to use our SDK and you see something that's missing, please go to our GitHub. You can add an issue there. We really want to hear from you guys, and that really helps us drive a lot of the decisions on what we add next.
I agree. I mean, like Justine said, we want to be user-driven. So please feel free to raise any issues and ask for features, and we will use that to drive our roadmap.
Are you accepting pull requests if someone was so brave as to wanting to contribute?
Why not? I mean, the repo that you're seeing on the screen it's not only for the CosmosDB Go SDK.
Yeah.
It's basically all the Azure SDKs. Using Go as a language. There is one for each language. So there is one Azure SDK for .NET, there is one for Java, one for Node.js, etc. Or I think it's Azure SDK for JS. So this one is for Go. So yes, obviously pull requests are completely open. In fact, we had a couple of already external contributors, like external from not our team.
Mm-hmm.
So sure, I mean, if you want to chip in.
And there's two, just to be clear, when they go in there and they look for Cosmos, they're going to see two SDKs in there, right? There's going to be one that we're talking about today that's brand new. That's our data plane SDK. So if we want to use this like a database, that's what this SDK is for. We're going to talk about. Well, another thing we've had for quite a while is the management, the resource provider Go SDK. And that gets auto-generated based upon our Swagger spec. So if you're a Go user and you want to do DevOps, on Cosmos, you can. It's right there in our Go SDK, and I believe it supports everything.
I think so too.
In our RP, so.
Yeah, it's basically, like you said, it's auto-generated from Swagger, so it should support everything that is in our RP.
Yep.
Yeah. So we just want to go over the resource model for the data plane SDK that we're focusing on today. The resource model looks really similar to the resource model for other SDKs. So if you're familiar with Cosmos DB and some of our other SDKs, this should be no surprise to you. The top level is your account. And with your account, you can access this using our AZ Cosmos client. And this will give you access to manage and create all of your databases in the account. So off of the client, you can go ahead and create your database client. And your database client gives you access to all of your containers. So adding containers, deleting containers. So when we get to the container level, we have a container client. And of course, with your container client, you can access all of the items in your container. So this is kind of the resource model and the flow of what that looks like in the Go SDK.
Just to follow up on that, and when you mention about other SDKs, you talk about .NET, Java, Python, Node.js, and these SDKs tend to divide themselves into SDKs that support what we call direct mode. We had like episode 13, I
You
think
remember?
it was.
Wow.
Yeah, of course. And we talk about the different connectivity modes. So just to do a refresh and kind of touch base on that. Go SDK is one of the gateway SDKs, which means that from the connectivity perspective, it will talk or connect through HTTPS, connecting to our gateway nodes. If we go back again to that presentation, we talk about how the system topology works, which is whenever you create a container, that container will have one or more physical partitions. Each physical partition will contain a set of replicas. Those set of replicas talk TCP. So what happens on an SDK on gateway mode is that we as the client will connect to the gateway node through HTTPS, and the gateway node will create those TCP connections to the backend replicas. On SDKs such as .NET and Java, where we support direct mode, then the TCP connection is established directly from the client. This one aligns with the Python and Node.js SDK or JavaScript SDK, which is for HTTPS.
Is it going to stay using gateway mode, or is there future plans? Or maybe we can talk about that later. But curious if we're going to work on a direct mode for this.
That's a great question. I think that the road ahead for that one will be some developments that might lie in the future that might make this easier. Like your question aligns with, okay, we know that gateway mode and direct mode, there is a latency difference in terms of the throughput that you can achieve. So our goal would be to provide the greatest possible throughput in a similar connection mode as direct, but I'm not sure if it's going to be the direct mode or something different.
Yeah. Okay. We definitely have a few other things on the roadmap for the Go SDK that we want to add before we think about adding another connectivity.
I was going to say, I mean, it's marginal, the improvement, I think, versus some of the other stuff I know you're prioritizing. So that's okay. I'm just asking because we're talking about it on the slide.
Yeah,
it's a great question.
Yeah. Cool. So with our Go SDK, we've talked about creating a client. So there's two ways that you can authenticate to your client. The first is using your shared key or secret credential. This is basically the master key authentication. But we also have authentication available with Azure Active Directory using role-based access control. So if you do decide to authenticate with this mode, we do want to call out that it's only data plane operations. So if you're thinking about creating databases, creating containers, things like that won't be supported if you're authenticating in this mode, but you certainly can access all of your items. And I believe we have a link if you're interested in how to actually set up role-based access control. What does that mean? So you can go to aka.ms/cosmos-native-rbac. And Mark, do we have a link that we can?
Wait, you talk about, oh, sorry.
Yeah,
right here. Got it.
Perfect. Yeah. So if you're interested in using this authentication and you're not sure how to set it up, you can go here to learn more about it.
Sorry, I'm doing a terrible job as a producer.
That's fine.
I'm trying to focus on the next thing, and I forgot about the current thing. So
now, one thing I was wondering, and going back to your comment, Mark, about the two different SDKs for Go, which is the management and the data plane SDK. If you wanted to use the Azure Active Directory or RBAC access with the data plane SDK, you could very well use the management SDKs for creation and provisioning of your databases and containers.
Okay, so a question for you and a comment. So what you're saying is using the same service principle, I can get RBAC rights to do the control plane operations, create an account, change throughput, do all that stuff, and do that through the control plane or the resource provider.
With the management plane SDK.
Management SDK. My second question is, are you going to provide control plane operations, or is this a departure for our data plane SDKs to separate these? Because I know legacy-wise, our RP, we never really exposed this stuff before. So there you go with our, at least leading with our .NET SDK and other SDKs that allow you to create database if not exist, or create container if not exist, or changing throughput, or index policies, all that stuff. The only thing you couldn't do was actually create the account. So is this something new that you're putting a bifurcating control plane and data plane?
I mean, the operations will still be there. We will go through them. So you can still create a database if you choose to authenticate with secret credentials.
I see. So you have it, but it's only for master keys.
Yeah. Exactly, because
the same for the other SDKs, right?
Yeah. That's correct. All the other SDKs, if you try to, if you authenticate with AAD or RBAC, and you try to perform a management plane operation like creating a database, they will fail.
I didn't know that. Okay. I thought if that had the same RBAC control plane access that it could, but what you're saying is it probably doesn't know how to read RP RBAC permissions or something, or that type of thing.
That would be a great question for an RBAC episode.
I got a few questions here. Well, this guy is saying hello from Florida. Gnarly duck. Nice to see you. Welcome. And Hassan here is watching a new episode. Thank you, Hassan, for joining us. Here's one. What about EF Core with this SDK?
That's a great question.
It's a question for Jeremy Lickness, actually. He owns Entity Framework. So I would ask Jeremy, and you could find him on Twitter, like, hey, you going to do a Go Entity Framework SDK for Cosmos? He might want to hear about that. So they're very open. I love that. The way they do their development. It's just, hey, put an issue on our GitHub, and we'll stack rank the votes and start building stuff. And that's how they do their development, which is kind of cool. So yeah, Jeremy Lickness can help you out there. Another question here: when building the client instance, can we specify read-write regions in some sequence? Okay, so do you get preferred region array, Matias?
Not yet. We are still waiting on, or actually working on it. But yes, that's one of the features that we have in the.
So it just includes application region, and you specify the single region then in the instance?
Not quite. We will probably start with the list of preferred locations or preferred regions.
Okay.
Like you provide the list of, similar to other SDKs where you provide, I guess the Java SDK, .NET SDK also supports it. You would provide a list of preferred locations or preferred regions, and we will use that priority list. The .NET SDK has one promoted API that is application region, where you set like where the application is running, and we figured out the rest. Right now, that's only a feature for the .NET SDK. We'll see how we can use that or port that into other SDKs.
So if I don't supply the region, does all requests go to the primary, or does it?
So the technical answer for that would be all the requests go to the global endpoint. So in CosmosDB, the global endpoint normally points to the primary region, which is when you go to the Azure portal, the first one in the list.
Right.
So that's basically on DNS resolution. We do the request to the global endpoint, and global endpoint resolves to the IP of the primary region, and that's how everything works. If you do a failover, normally the primary endpoint changes. So the global endpoint still resolves to the primary region, which is now the one that you just fail over to. The goal with defining preferred locations is when you have multiple regions and you maybe want to do read operations, and you want to do local reads. Like instead of going to the global endpoint, which goes to the primary region, do local reads. That one, like I said, is one of the things that we have yet in store to release.
Okay, makes sense. Cool. I think everybody got that RBAC URL. I left it up there as long as.
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. So after you have your client set up and authenticated, you can perform database operations. So we allow you to create a database, delete a database, and when you're creating, you can create it either with or without shared throughput. So if you did have shared throughput, you can change that throughput. And again, these would be available if you're authenticating with the master key.
Got it. Yep.
And there's also some container operations. So creating a container either with or without that provision throughput. If you want to create a container with autoscale, you can do that as well. Delete the container and then change the throughput that you provisioned.
Can I use this with a serverless account?
You should, yes. Why not?
So create a container without any throughput?
Yep.
Okay.
The throughput, I think it aligns with other SDKs in the sense that the throughput is an optional parameter.
Yeah,
we'll see that when we go through the demo. So, yeah, you don't need to specify the throughput.
Okay. Yeah, and if you're not serverless, we default to whatever the minimum is, which is going to be 400 RU.
Exactly.
So,
yeah,
okay.
unless it was a shared database.
For you?
Yes, shoot.
Hold on, here we go. It's a long one. I noticed that, for example, for read operations or write, clients should additionally do marshal and unmarshal operations by their own. Will that be wrapped in the future?
Can I take that question afterwards when we are going through the demo?
Yeah, sure. Let me. Yep. Okay. I'll pop it up later. I'm not even sure what you're talking about. I suppose if I wrote the source code for this SDK, I didn't. So
probably.
I'm too busy doing this. Okay, cool.
Yeah, so next we have some item operations. You can create, upsert, read, replace, and delete an item, as well as this is one of the new features. Call back to the beginning. We've titled this as like new features to the Go SDK. This is one of our newer features, the ability to actually query some items. So this is only single partition query, cross-partition query, unfortunately, isn't available yet. And it's also really important to note that this is effectively simple queries. So if you have a query with, a filter, group by, aggregations, more complex query operators, unfortunately, are not available yet. But this is just one more example. If you see something that you really want in the SDK and it's missing today, please give us feedback on our GitHub and we can help prioritize it. There are quite a few things that we don't support yet. So having, community feedback will really help us prioritize what's next.
I've got one I don't see on there. It's my new favorite, read many. Is that supported?
Yeah.
It is.
No,
it's not. Okay.
Not yet.
Matias, I never even knew that thing. I never even knew that existed until I think last week. I saw you use that as an answer on Stack Overflow. And I'm like, what is read many? I've never seen. So I immediately went and looked it up. And I'm like, I love this. I wish I had had this before. This is great. I just want to ask you, since I got you, how many things can I pass in that array?
I don't think there is a limit.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm. It's similar with, right. I think it's similar to bulk in the sense that there isn't a real limit. The SDK is figuring out
got it.
On the back.
Basically. Just dispatches basically when it can. So okay, makes sense. And query with partition key, transactional batch, love it.
Yeah, we also have transactional batch. So if you want to do a bunch of transactions together and make sure they all either succeed or fail as a unit, you can use transactional batch. I believe we do have limits on the transactional batch. It's 100 items in a batch, right?
Yep, that's correct.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah.
Yep.
I got another one for you. How about Json Patch?
Also in the roadmap.
Okay. No worries.
Yeah, so this is the full list of item operations that are supported. We realize that there's a lot of things that are missing, but yeah, if it's not on this slide.
I mean, the goal is again to going back to something that Justine said at the beginning. We are driving by user requests, so
Yep.
the more vocal our users, the more we drive those features. So if you
Hey, look
want
at,
to use
I
it,
didn't even know read many exist until 2 weeks ago. So I
Yeah.
can't want what I don't know exists. But just to give you some more piling on, looks like somebody else liked read many too. So
yeah.
yeah.
Regarding queries, I actually I'm gonna go out of script. Good question.
This show is all about off script, Matias. Please.
So in theory, thinking out loud. So if I do an aggregation like a count or maybe a sum, because the query is scoped to a partition key, it should work, right? Or I
To do
won't.
the aggregations, right? Because on the gateway, that was always kind of the trick. That was the problem. Was doing aggregations cross partition.
Exactly, and this is not. I mean, right now our query is only single partition key, so there is no
Well,
cross partition
here's what I'll
work.
say, folks. Go download our Go SDK.
Yeah. Let us know if it works.
I'll put it up here, right here. You go and download and tell us what happens. So
Yeah. So this is the perfect segue. If you want to actually get the SDK and try it out yourself, you can use the go get command to get our SDK. This also, by the way, for those of you interested in the repo and where this SDK lives in that Azure SDK for Go repo we showed earlier, this kind of also shows you the path of where to find our specific SDK. There's a lot of SDKs in that one repository.
Yeah, there are.
And you can follow this short link to get more information. We have a README, a bunch of examples here. So definitely check out aka.ms cosmosdb Go SDK and learn all about it. And now I believe we'll dive into the part that everyone is really here for, which is the demo.
Yep.
Cool.
So going back to my lovely code screen. So the demo we will go through all the different operations that we talk about, different type of authentications, and I'll try to address the marshalling and unmarshalling question when we reach to that point. So I'll start with this one. I will start with creating a client with the key. I will show you once the debugger kicks off. I will show you how to actually create we create the client, which is I will have an endpoint and a key, obviously coming from some hidden configuration because I don't want anyone stealing my account. And then we'll just create a key credential. And from there is a method called new client with key that receives the endpoint and credentials. This last nil is an optional parameter which includes some client configurations. When we do implement the preferred regions or preferred locations thing, it will probably one of the options that we can pass on the client constructor. So just to go back to that one.
Are we going to support bulk? That's another question, I guess. Looking at options here.
Great question. Hopefully, yes. I'm not sure.
Okay.
Again, priority-wise, will depend on users' feedback.
Yeah.
So going back to the demo, we create a client, everything is fine, and then the next operation will be try to create a database. So how do we create a database? We define some obviously name, and we use the database properties objects. We define the ID. And there are some options. I put the options here because, again, if we go back to the slides, there was one potential creation of the database with throughput. So if you wanted to create a database and define some throughput, it will be through the database options or the create database options. And then we simply just grab the client, call create database with the context. This is for you, Mark. Just an FYI, in Go, all the operations that perform a network request receive a context. So in case I don't know how familiar you are with Go.
Not very at all, but that's okay.
I was just jumping in case you added. Oh, what's the context?
What's the context? Oh, yeah. Good luck trying to predict what I'm going to say.
Yes. So okay, we execute the operation. We check for errors. One way that we can in Go verify errors, so that because this SDK lives inside the Azure SDK umbrella or Azure SDK group, there are common error codes or error types or structs that you can use with any of the Azure SDKs. So this would be the generic way interacting with any of the Azure SDKs for Go, where you can actually verify if an operation resulting in an error. The idea with having a generic way across all the SDKs is that when a user learns one of the SDKs, in this case for Go, maybe they started working with the Azure Storage SDK for Go. Then they jumped into using the Azure Cosmos SDK. They don't have to relearn how things like error handling work. So we are using common patterns and common APIs and types across all the SDKs to help users learn and get up to speed with any of the SDKs quicker. So basically, we'll create. We are just printing the creation of database with an activity ID. All the responses from our SDKs also contain the known headers like the activity ID that you would expect in other SDKs or area charges. Not in this particular operation, but in the point operations, we'll see all the common properties and headers. So we go back to creating the database, and then we create the container. Container creation, very similar to the database creation. Again, we have the container properties. We have all the required fields as part of the container properties, which include the ID or the name, the partition key definition, which defines which is the path in this case. I'm going to create a container that will hold books. So the genre will be my partition key. And in this case, I am defining a container.
So I have a question about that.
Yes.
Sorry to interrupt. So on line 20, I noticed this is called paths, and it takes an array of partition key paths. Does this support hierarchical keys?
That's a great question. Not right now, but the goal is, because this maps to the REST API contract, and the REST API contracts support multiple partition keys to support the hierarchical.
That was always an array way before we had hierarchical support in there. I do have a related question. How about large partition key? Do you have V2 support for?
Yes, this is using the V2 support for large partition keys.
Okay.
And then going back to the optional, I mean, like you said before, for example, you are in a serverless account, or you don't want to provision throughput because you're using the shared throughput from a database. That's why the throughput is an optional parameter that is coming as part of the call. In this case, I'm creating a manual throughput of 400 RUs, but I could, let's see, I could create an auto-scale throughput instead of the manual throughput. It's all about choosing which method goes, or which method you want to use to create the throughput definition. But we support manual and we support auto-scale in the different flavors.
I have a Go question for you.
Yes.
What does the ampersand mean when you pass that as a value? Is it passing the address of that value?
Yes.
Oh, so it's C-like.
Yeah, it's similar. I mean, if we go back to the previous one, I think we had this nil here. Nil is because we use pointers, similar to. I mean, this brings me back to like many years ago. But there are pointers and addresses for those optional parameters. We either pass a pointer to a reference, like you were mentioning here, or we don't. And the code internally can say, okay, did I receive a pointer or no? If I receive a pointer, I'm expecting a value. But yes, that's the pattern.
That's curious they would implement that. I always thought Go was supposed to be much, much simpler, and that passing pointers was always the thing that kind of tripped up folks in C and C++ world. So I'm curious about that, but I'm sure someone will inform
Someone much smarter than me can probably explain it better.
It's the performance versus complexity trade-off, right?
Yeah, right. Yeah. Okay, sorry. Keep going.
No worries. So we just created the container for 400 RUs. And another super fun thing that I discovered with Go is the defer command. Defer will actually execute this after I'm done with all the demo. So even if these guys fail, I will still clean up and delete all my data from my containers.
Is that like a user statement where it deletes resources once they go out of scope, or is that something just?
I guess you could compare that, sort of. It's a nice parallelism.
Yeah.
So we'll go into the create item. So create item, to create any item, we need the partition key. So in order to create one partition key, again, we go to AZCosmos, new partition key of type string. And in this case, I will create a fantasy book. I will create my document as obviously the Lord of the Rings as a book. And here is the part where someone was asking about marshalling. So so we could instead
Put
do
that
the
question.
marshalling. Thank you. We could wrap this marshalling, but because going back to my statement about having the common experience, all the Azure SDKs for Go don't include marshalling as part of the SDK. They give the user the freedom of marshalling. Marshalling is basically, think about it, Mark, as when you work in C# with JSON deserialization and serialization. So this is taking this object, this book, or JSON object or map, and then generating the byte representation, the byte array representation of that.
Got
So
it.
the input for the create item call is basically the partition key and the byte representation of the document. Again, we could take another alternative was to take a dynamic interface here, and then we'll do the marshalling. But in order to be consistent across the SDKs, because all users across the SDKs, or at least for the other Azure Go SDKs, they do the marshalling themselves and are used to do the marshalling themselves to create a consistent experience. We are following the same path, which
So
is
you're passing a byte array rather
yes.
than okay.
Yep. There are no, like you would expect in C# like the T's. There are no types. So we always receive the byte array that represents the document in this case.
Okay. Well, that's pretty simple. Using that Marshall command there, I would think I don't know of anything in C# that's kind of equivalent to that. You would have to put it into a byte array into a stream, I think.
Right. And one super great thing that I learned from Go is all these things like the JSON Marshall. You don't need an external dependency to work on. They are just part of the language. So it's not like, okay, like in C# where now you have system text JSON as part of the .NET 6.
Yeah, right.
But before you had to like bring dependencies like maybe Newtonsoft or find some other library that would do the serialization, deserialization.
Question related from the same viewer. Can we marshal plain struct or should we use map to describe the document?
You can marshal whatever you want. As long as can be marshal, you can use a struct, you can marshal a struct, you can marshal a map. I just use a map. Yeah, true. I just use a map for simplicity in the demo, but you can use a struct.
Got it. Okay.
So go back to creating the item. From the item response, again, we can get the activity ID, we can get the request charge. There are other properties like the session token that hopefully the tooltip will stay there. So we have the session token. And this is, I'm going to make a parenthesis here about consistency support on the Go SDK. So we know we have 5 different consistency in Cosmos DB. So you have strong, unbounded, and stainless. You have session, you have consistent prefix, and you have eventual. So from all these 5, the only one that has any kind of client involvement is session. So strong and bounded and stainless, you send the HTTP request with the payload. The gateway will take care of making sure that the strong consistency and quorum is achieved. Nothing to worry about there. You have eventual. On eventual, you send the payload, and yes, the operation will get acknowledged, and you will eventually be consistent across all the replicas and all the regions. Then you have consistent prefix, which acts as a similar way. I think there is like a threshold there that you have to configure. I can't remember exactly which are the parameters for consistent prefix, but the one that requires some client work is session. For session, it is expected that if you want to write a document and be able to read right away, you need from the write operation to grab the session token. So technically, you could grab it from the item response here, and then pass it as an option on the read. So that way, you are creating this session of, okay, I want to read my writes. This is the read. This is the write that I just did. I'm doing the write operation for that session. some of the SDKs include what we call a session container or session cache, which means that it will internally maintain a cache of all the write operations and the session tokens for those write operations. So when you do the read, because you're using the same client instance, you don't necessarily need to pass the token from the write. If you are obviously going across client instances, then yes, you need to pass the session token. And in our consistency docs, it says explicitly either you're using a single writer session or single client instance, or you're passing the session token around. What we are missing from the Go SDK is that session cache. But in theory, if you wanted session consistency, it would be as simple as grabbing the session token from the response or the write, and then pass it in as options on the read.
So
Okay.
if I write multiple documents at one time, will my session token be the same, or do I need to manage, my session token and which document it came from? Like, what level do I need to manage?
That's a great question. So if you are writing multiple documents at one time, if you're using transactional batch, that's a single transaction. So the session token from the transactional batch will be a single one. Now for the others, the session token I think is sequential. So the only problem there would be if you are sending these create operations concurrently. It's finding out which was the latest one that got written or confirmed. So yeah, that would be one thing that the session container on the SDK would solve for you.
What if I don't pass my session token? Am I just getting eventual consistency?
Right. It's similar to any other SDKs. If you don't pass a session token, you might find the document, but there is no guarantee that you do.
Like consistent prefix is the guarantee if you don't pass the token.
Okay.
And the other one you were talking about where you have to set values, that's bounded staleness.
Thank you.
Consistent prefix doesn't care in there. So that's good to know, right? And people should know this as well, is session is unique in that it's a client-based consistency.
Exactly.
So that's how you maintain read your own rights and write, all that other stuff right before read. All that stuff is you're passing a token that says, give me back the thing I just wrote. So
exactly.
So that's the easiest way. Just flow that back to the user who wrote the data, and then make them pass that back every time, and then they'll always get their latest data. So,
which is something that even if you use, for example, the C# SDK, you are creating a middle tier application that is maybe interacting with the UI, and the UI is, you have maybe multiple instances of your middle tier that are scaling based on your load. You would still need to pass the session token to the caller, because that caller might issue the read, and that read may land on another middle tier instance.
That's right. If you have a single instance of your data layer servicing multiple middle tiers, SDK is not going to know, right?
Exactly.
So,
yep.
Yeah. Cool.
So going back here, so we have the create. The read is very similar. I will try to read the document that I just wrote. So we have the partition key and the ID. So those are the only two things that I need. Again, if I wanted to enforce session consistency, here is the options where I would pass the session token. And going back to the marshalling and marshalling, the response again is the response. The value of the response is again an array of bytes. So the unmarshalling is something that is on the user control. You need to unmarshal the byte response into whatever structure that you want. In this case, I'm just again using a map, but I'm using this to print that I just read the Lord of the Rings, and this is activity ID and consuming one RU for the read operation.
I noticed your new partition key string. That's a
yes.
bit. Are you just being explicit there, or is there?
So that's a great question. So one of the things, if you go back to C#, for example, in C# you can have the same method. You can have new partition key, and then receive three types of parameters. You know that we support partition keys that are strings, partition keys that are numeric, and partition keys that are Boolean. So in other languages, you might expect a single method that has three overrides, which is receiving a numeric, a Boolean, or a string. Go doesn't support overrides in this case, so we explicitly have methods for each of the types of partition keys.
Got it. Okay.
So going back to replace is very similar. In this case, I'm just adding one of the properties to the document. Again, we need to marshal, and the method is just replace a stream with the partition key, the ID that I want to replace, and the content of the marshal. This very similar. This is very similar to any other SDKs that are performing a replace operation. Again, I print the response from the update, and delete is very similar to read in the sense that we take the partition key and the ID, and that's how we delete an item.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Question on update. We support e-tags.
Yes. Okay. So let's do this. Why not? I can probably edit the code without breaking the debug, hopefully, so I don't.
Oh man, here we go.
Here we go.
You're coding without a net live on our show. This is
yeah. So okay, replace item. Replace item takes item options. So in theory, one of the cool things is I can actually see the source code without it, having to download anything. This is basically getting the source code from the GitHub repository. Cool. So I know that there is an item option. So I would say, for example, options, and it would be azurecosmos item options, and then here I could see something like the session. I have the session contain, the session token. Let me see item options. We have pre-triggers, post-trigger session token, consistency level. If you want to override the particular request consistency level, indexing directive, the same thing. If match e-tag, this is for what you just mentioned about optimistic concurrency control. And one interesting thing that I forget to mention is that one of the cool features that we had in other SDKs is the content response on write. So what this means is that by default, the writes don't include the body. So when you're creating an item, you just, let me rewind a bit. So in our .NET, Java, all the SDKs, initially when you did a write operation, like a create, replace, you used to get the response body as part of the response. So you will get the same document that you just wrote as part of the response. That use obviously network bandwidth. So we introduce a feature that will allow you to optimize network bandwidth by telling the SDK don't include the content of the response on create operations. So that obviously reduces the network bandwidth that you need to perform any operation. In Go, we have the same support. By default, this is disabled. So basically, this follows, I think, Java. I think Java was the first one that started with this pattern. So you can opt into receiving the response, but by default, it won't. Because most of the time, you don't really need it. I mean, if you think about a create operation or a replace, you already have the content that you just wanted to write. So why get it back? I mean, you already have it.
Mm-hmm.
Makes sense.
So I don't know where we were, but we went to the...
we were messing around with e-tag.
Yeah, we were going to add the e-tag.
Okay, so I showed you how to add the e-tag if you ever wanted to play with optimistic concurrency, but so you can. Now going back to transactional batch. So transactional batch, very similar to other SDKs that support transactional batch. You start with the partition key. All transactional batches involve the scope of a partition key. So in this case, I'm creating a new transactional batch for a particular partition key, and I will create two books. In this case, the Wheel of Time and El Rick of Memory. I'm again marshalling these two books into the batch. So the batch as let me try. So I'm calling create item, but we support any of the operations excluding patch that transactional batch supports. So it would be new transactional batch. You can probably I'm navigating source code now, so you can call create item, delete item, replace item, absort item, and read item as part of your transactional batch. In this case, I'm just creating two books together, and then I execute the transactional batch. One of the things about transactional batch is that it contains something which is the response. So we know that when a transactional batch is executed, it could fail or succeed as a whole unit. So if you could, sorry, not if you could, if you for any in any of the operations that you are sending as part of the batch, that operation fails, the idea is you check the success of the batch response. If the operation is transactional batch did not succeed, then one of the operations would be the faulty one. Like imagine that you send, I don't know, 5 creates. then one of those creates fails for whatever reason. Maybe you wanted to create an item that already existed. So how the transactional batch works is all the other operations will have a status code of fail dependency. One of them, and this is what I'm explaining, is similar to all the other SDKs. It's not nothing particular to Go. So all there will be one particular operation that is that has the fault of the failed transactional batch, which won't have the 424 status code, and that one is basically the one that says, okay, this failed because of whatever you were trying to do couldn't be completed.
Yeah. And you'd only have one failure in any given batch, right? Like if we hit a failure, then we fail the whole batch right away.
Exactly. For whatever it was to the first failure that was encountered, that stops the batch, everything is rolled back, and you get a response with a false success. And when you do get the successful response, inside the batch, you have all the results. So every individual operation that you sent has an individual response. And in this case, I can, for example, print that the operation 1 took X amount of RUs, and operation 2 took X amount of RUs, and which was the status code for each individual operation that I sent. This could be reads, it could be create, subserts, replace, or deletes. And finally, last one is query items. So again, this is the syntax that we'll use to query items in a container. Well, I start with the partition key again. I'm defining the partition key as fantasy, and I'm just sending a select star query through this API. This query item, the items pager or the pager API, is again common to all the Go SDKs. So if you're familiar with Go SDKs for Azure Storage or any of the other Azure services, I go back to always Azure Storage because it's the first one that comes to my mind. Not that I have any particular preference, but so all of those will use the item pager. So if you're familiar with running queries in other SDKs, it will be the same thing here. Each response obviously has items inside. The items again go back to using marshalling if we want to, and marshalling if we want to get the actual body out of the byte array. And in this case, the demo just finds both of the books, extracts the name property out of the response for each book, and will print the activity ID and RU consumption of reading these two books out of the container.
I got two Go questions, if I could, back where you were on there. Actually, one of them I can see right there. What is the key combination for doing that not equal sign you got in your source code?
This one?
Yeah, how do I type that?
Oh, no. So this is normally, it's not particular to Go. This is, so if I type bang
equals. Oh, so it translates it into that.
It's not about Go. It's about, I'm using different font. So I feel that we are going to derail. But
okay. So if I type bang equals, I would get that if I was using this font you've got.
Exactly. I think it's one of the fonts that comes with Windows 11, provided by Microsoft. I can't remember the name.
Windings?
Cascadia Code.
Okay. Underscore comma. What is underscore comma? This must be something Go.
On line 305.
On 305.
This one is okay. This also exists as in C#. This call returns this range operator. This is kind of like a for each in C#, but returns two items: the index and the actual item. So if I don't care about the index, if in Go, similar to C#, if I don't care about a particular parameter and I won't use it, I can use the underscore, and it will just say, okay, I know there is a parameter there. I don't care. Yes, thank you.
Ligature.
That is a ligature support.
Thank you, Sean.
Well,
I will
go get that.
I'm going to endeavor to install that into my VS Code.
Yeah.
So here's Cascadia code. This is another.
Cascadia. Yes. Yes. Thank you.
Okay.
So last demo that I have is using AAD. So what I did was I already have the method here. I will explain it in a second. So I will change the create client with give to create client with AAD. So because one of the things that you can't do is create databases and containers, I'm going to comment all the operations that involve obviously dealing with metadata or management plane operations. And I'm going to do something which is, if I want to directly, I already know that this container databases are there. I don't need to check for it every day, every execution. One thing I can do is from the client, I can say, okay, new container, I pass the ID and the ID of the database or the name and the container, and this will give me a proxy object, which is again the container client. And I can perform all the operations the same way that I would do if I would, for example, do a read database or read container. I don't need to do those operations in order to interact with the container that I know already exists. So again, I'm going to press F5. We'll go into the details of how do you create a client with IAD. So again, for all my configurations, I have an endpoint. And something important here is this. So AC Identity is also a package that is coming from the Azure SDK for Go. So this is common to all the Azure SDKs. There is a similar one for .NET, there is a similar one for Java. It's basically a centralized type that manages all types of AAD credentials or token credentials. In this case, I'm creating one that is mapping to a SIG or an application that I created on the AAD tenant. So I went to the AAD tenant, I created an application, and I went through the link that you shared earlier, and I gave them data write access. That one, yes. So what I did is I followed those steps that are very well documented, and I gave to that application the permissions enough to execute data plane operations and perform CRUD. So any read and write operations on the containers. And basically, I have the tenant ID here, which is the tenant where my application exists, my client ID, and a secret that I won't share. And the difference is that when I create this credential, which is very similar to obviously creating this credential, obviously changes the input, but from creating the client perspective, it's just calling new client, passing the endpoint, and then the credential object. There are different types of credentials that you can create. In this case, I have a secret. Obviously, the goal wouldn't be to always have a secret, because otherwise it would be the same problem as we have here. But you can use different types of token credentials or credentials identity based on different contexts. For example, if you're running an application inside an Azure compute, I think you can use the environment identity. So that wouldn't be using the client secret, but because I'm running this in my machine, obviously there is no environment or anything. But the way that you would create the client would be the same, just obviously calling the AC identity. I can't remember the Azure CLI chain. We have chain token credentials, default Azure credential. That will be the one that creates the one that it's representing the current application identity when running on Azure. And then I just create a client, and I can perform any of the other operations that I performed on the previous demo that I should be able to. So I
that
still can create.
New container, we're not actually creating a new container. We're just getting containers that already exist, right?
Exactly. This is what we call a proxy object, or what we're referring to as the container client, which is an object or a client that allows you to perform operations within the scope of a container. It's not doing any network call. That's why if you compare this one with other operations that do perform network calls, those contain the context.
Right.
This one is just a proxy. I mean, we have a similar operator in other SDKs, and the idea is it allows you to interact with the container without really doing any network call. I mean, if I know that this container already exists, I shouldn't need to read it or perform a network call to obtain a reference that allows me to operate on it. And that's it. That should cover everything, all our operations, code examples, everything that I'm showing here.
But a question from a user here. Yes. Your query text didn't include a partition key, but we need to invoke the partition key in new query items page. Does that mean the query would be logic partition? Yes.
The query is explicitly scoped to this partition key. I don't need to include the partition key in the query.
Yeah. But you could just put the partition key in the filter predicate, and does this SDK sniff that out like other SDKs?
That's a great question. No, we don't.
Okay.
But if people are expecting that or have that feedback, please send it on the issues, and we'll pick it up.
Theme of the day, right?
Does new partition key support an array? Like I could run a query against a list of bounded list of partitions.
Right now it doesn't,
Okay.
and the reason that would be okay, that would require executing multiple queries and then aggregating the results,
Yeah.
which is similar to a cross-partition query.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's all for the demo. Going back to the presentation, I think we can close with we have one quick start that you can go through. It's up here on the AKMS link that you can follow if you want to, get started with the Go SDK. One thing I do want to mention is that I learned about Go, which is I guess also a thing that it's amazing, is the APIs are self-documented. So the link that we shared earlier that was pointing to how to download the Go SDK, that's on the Go repository. All the examples are also there. It's part of the package. So it's really neat that everything is packed together as a single thing that you can reference and read and use without having to go to multiple pages and look.
I like that. I like just being able to stick in my editor and just be able to basically kind of traverse a namespace of stuff, right? So I could dot whatever or hover over it or whatever, and I can get bubble help or text or whatever on that. That's cool. I like that. That's just faster than having to have a browser up and then their API docs up in a separate thing. So,
yep.
Totally.
Very cool. Well, you guys, this was fantastic. And look, BSD guy says nice. So I agree, BSD guy. And in fact, look at so many options. I agree. I mean, I don't look at all the stuff you've gotten here is fantastic. And, I'm glad you've got other stuff coming. But this is wonderful. I'm really excited. And I think people are going to want to check this out. So I'll put this up again. So our docs, or the docs that these guys have built, aka.ms/cosmos-db-go-sdk. And then the RBAC one, I'll put that up again because people should be using AAD, yes. Right? I mean, for years, people were saying, you guys aren't a real enterprise service without AAD support in there, or AAD and RBAC. And then we did it. So hoping people use that everywhere they can. And then, of course, we got the quick start right here. As well, aka.ms cosmos-db-go-sdk-quick start.
That's a mouthful.
I know. I put a lot of dashes in there to make it easy for everyone.
That's okay. Yeah.
You did it like a champ, Mark.
It's cool. Thank you very much. I just almost ran out of breath for that. So it's like diving in the pool to go hunting for pennies, and then I just barely have enough breath. So, okay. You guys, thank you so much. And thank you, everyone, for joining us this week. Just some quick announcements. We have a user group, and we run meetups every month. It's all virtual, so but we're going to look at maybe doing some in-person user groups, maybe hitting some of the reactors coming up this year now that things are kind of opening up again. But anyway, come join our community and come check out our meetups. Lots of good past meetups on there as well. And speaking of things that happened in the past, this is episode 49. We've got 48 other episodes, including one with Matias. I think it's my longest one ever. It's like almost 100 minutes. So if you want to get deep on our .NET SDK, Matias here, who's the guy that wrote the thing. Am I praising you too highly?
Oh, no, yeah.
Okay, he works on the team that creates
a lot of it. Yeah.
Really. I stand on the shoulders of giants.
I don't want to overextend him.
No.
He's the CVP of our SDK. Come join us. It's episode 13, if I remember, or if Matias is correct.
It is.
So come check that out and all the other episodes we've got in there. So that's it. Oh, I think I see a couple of questions. Just thank you and thank you.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.
Here, I like this. This is my favorite right here. Okay, I'm going to spend my weekend using Cosmos DB. Absolutely. Awesome. Definitely. And hit us up on Twitter. That's where I live on Twitter.
Me too.
So Justine's going to start hanging out on
Twitter.
Yeah,
right? I'm not on there very much. I didn't add my Twitter handle, but It's just my first and last name. You can
That's
tweet
okay. All right. Cool. Well, thank you guys for joining us. Next week, we're going to talk about our Linux emulator support for MongoDB, as well as we now have support for MongoDB API in Azure Data Studio, which
Nice.
is remarkable. We've got support for MongoDB before our SQL API. So that's how cool we are over in Cosmos land. We're doing it right. Okay. No favorites over here. So so come join us next week for that. And in the meantime, we'll see you next time. Take care, everybody.
Bye bye.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everyone.